Good afternoon. I'm Lou Palacio, and this is Mike Schneider. We're with Fortinet, and we're going to talk to you today about operational technology. And a lot of people ask us, what is that? And just very simply put, this is security for industrial control type systems. So that's what we're going to focus on here today. And we hope you enjoy it. Thank you for being here, and thank you to our partner High Point for allowing us to be here. So we're just going to jump right in real quick about the OT challenges and what we're seeing now in this market. One, most ICS lacks security by design. It's not something that was sort of inherent or built in. And as I'm sure you know, a good bit of it is old, right? When you look at plants and maybe even like oil rigs and just manufacturing in general, the systems that they have in there are very old, very long shelf lives, or I should say life cycles. And whereas on the IT side, we're used to switching out every 3 to 5 years, we're upgrading firewalls and what have you, whereas on the OT side, that generally doesn't happen. So that inherently there isn't a lot of that there. The attack surface, that is expanding very rapidly, okay? So think of like an old medieval castle with sort of like one way in and out, okay? Like the big drawbridge, and when it's up, it's closed, and it's basically impenetrable. Well, now what's happening in that scenario is there's lots of kind of different ways in, okay? They've been modifying the castle as things have kind of gotten a little more modern. They're moving into a lot of digital transformation programs that are taking place are opening up attack surfaces, right? So there's a lot of that going on. The pandemic, by nature, remote access requirements for third parties, that has significantly opened up, so you have remote access into certain systems that have never really had that before. So you basically have this movement where sort of OT and IT are starting to converge, okay? And where you've had a lot of, like I said, adoption of new technologies, 5G, a lot of IoT hanging on now, things that are connected to networks that traditionally haven't been. Like Mandalay Bay, how they've got the big fish tanks there. If you've ever been to Vegas, it's pretty cool down there, right? Yeah, well, the pumps are connected to a network, and that's actually how people hacked into Mandalay Bay. And they were able to get into the network and kind of work their way through because the fish pumps were insecure, and they were able to hack right into that. So you have a lot of those things that are coming on that are increasing this attack surface, and so your threats are becoming more prevalent in this environment. Air gapping used to be a way that they would rely on kind of surfacing, again going back to the medieval castle example, but that's what's breaking down. That air gap is no longer reliable. So now you're seeing more opportunity to attack systems that are inherently not secure. So what are the industry concerns? Well, the big one right now is visibility, right? When we talk to people, OT directors, and we say, hey, what are your systems, what do you have where, and what's on your network? And by the way, who has access to that? They often can't tell us because they simply don't know. So there's a lack of visibility to applications, users, and devices. Our solution, our FortiGate, which is our flagship product, it's basically a next-gen firewall with a lot of other goodies built into it, which we will get to momentarily. Our gate, our switch, and our access point, they all run on our operating system, which we consider our special sauce. That operating system has inherently built into it more than 55 ICS protocols. So we have the ability to have visibility across these networks and know what is what. So we can produce reports and tell you what you have and who has access to what. We also have more than 400 IDS signatures, so as far as the threats are concerned, we understand those as well. Flat network architectures. Again, every customer is different. There are some customers that have IT networks and separate OT networks. A lot of times they just have one network where a lot of their industrial stuff is just kind of hanging on. And so it's very flat, and there's no segmentation. I mean, that's That's about as insecure as you can get. Very, very poor security hygiene. And so we find a lot of customers that is a very good starting point, is just simple segmentation in that environment. Again, our FortiGate, our switch, but also our network access control product is a very good fit in that environment. Unpatched, well, first of all, legacy equipment, but oftentimes unpatched legacy equipment. Again, because there isn't a lot of updates inherently that happen in these systems. They are controlled by people very different. OT network directors are very, very different from IT directors, and what they care about is very different. On the OT side, it's all about uptime and safety, number one paramount. Whereas on the IT side, we will shut things down to fix and patch. That doesn't happen over here, because shutting things down is a loss of productivity, and a loss of productivity is a loss of revenue. Not generally tolerated. So the importance of simple things in the IT world don't equally translate as an apples to apples comparison in the OT world, and therefore you have oftentimes unpatched legacy equipment. Again, a big vulnerability. Our EDR, endpoint detection and response, is a very good solution there. Now, I will tell you, you've probably heard about a lot of really good EDRs out there, and I don't really have anything bad to say about any of the leading ones. I mean, SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, and others, they're very, very good products. But they are generally designed to support IT networks and really high-octane, so to speak, IT networks. They are not necessarily designed to support, let's say, Microsoft XP operating system. Our EDR is specifically designed to support legacy systems for the purpose of this market. I'm not saying they can't do it. Well, actually, I am saying in a lot of cases they can't do it. But there is a difference in terms of what you can support and what you cannot support. And at Fortinet, because we are committed to this space, our EDR is specifically engineered to support legacy OSs, and I mean stuff that's like 20 years old plus. The increasing cost of running MPLS across geographically dispersed sites, obviously I'm talking about SD-WAN and migrating or upgrading to SD-WAN. Our FortiGate, so our firewall inherently has SD-WAN built into it, and for those of you who are of the deeper technical persuasion, how do we manage that, and how are we able to pump that kind of level of traffic through an SD-WAN and have SSL encryption, decryption happening at the same time? That's a very good question. Our chips, we don't use commercial chips like Intel or others. We make our own ASICs chips, and we have 2 for the firewall and 2 for SD-WAN. Our SD-WAN can be provisioned at any time at no additional cost. It's whether you actually provision it or not. And that is all built into every single firewall that we have, no matter how big or how small, because it's all part of the operating system. So that is a huge, if you are already segmenting or moving toward a segmentation project and want to upgrade to SD-WAN, we are an excellent one-stop shop, one-size-fits-all, to do that process in one product. Again, it's just a question of provisioning. And the pandemic has really, really driven remote logins. So our FortiGate, we have an authenticator, and of course, 2-factor authentication through our tokens. We are, I'm sorry. We have the ability to address remote SSL VPN login to specific systems within that environment. All right. Oh, don't go again. Okay, this is just very quickly, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, okay? This is what most of us in this room, where we do our business and where we've made our business. This is just a very super high level IT design. You have your intranet here, you have the internet, maybe a remote site, Okay, these are your servers, where you VPN into over here. This is where we've made our bread and butter, most of us, throughout our careers. What we're talking about here is this area right here, your OT area. We have 3 zones, your DMZ, which is basically where traffic, kind of dumps in or comes off of your IT side. You have your process networks and you have your control networks. So it's broken into those 3 zones. That is a very high level, typical OT topography right there. Just like you would have remote sites, like a bank branch or let's say Wendy's. Wendy's is a big customer of ours, right? They have their headquarters and they have, dozens, thousands of stores, locations. Just so would you have here. This could be a substation in the Mojave Desert. It could be an oil rig. It could be, one of 24 plants that Procter & Gamble has across the country, okay? So a lot of similarities going on, but a lot of different functionality happening, and that's the key. So this right here, this is kind of, this is north-south traffic. Okay, and then these numbers here, your levels 0 through 5, this is what we call the Purdue Model. It was a concept that was created by some academia types at Purdue University, hence the name. And what they did is they broke the 3 zones that I talk about on the OT side. This is just so we can talk about, the areas within each of the zones and what they are and what they mean. So it's just like a guide point. At the top, you have basically out in the wild, this is your internet, your cloud services, third-party vendors, people on the outside, maybe logging in. Your IT stuff is all here, all right, and this is your enterprise zone. But really, because we're focusing on OT, so you've got your DMZ, your sort of enterprise corporate area, and here's where you start to get into your ops control and then your process control down here. And this is what we call deep OT. This is like, on the plant floor. It's where you have your robotic arms, for example, in car manufacturers. It's the actual systems that are processing all the things on the oil rig out in the ocean or wherever it may be. So how does Fortinet fit into this? So if you look on the left, obviously this is a build. If you look on the left, we're going to give you some solutions, and on the right is where Fortinet fits in at each of the respective areas of the Purdue model. Okay, so just as follow as we go, if you talk about access layer segmentation, you're going to access that. Obviously, you need to access each of the zones if they're segmented, right? So this is where you would access that. And as we follow this build, you're going to see firewall segmentation. You're going to see web server protection, authentication, threat protect, app control, endpoint protection, deception. We have a product called FortiDeceptor. It's basically like a honeypot. You put it in. It's great for SOCs. You draw in some bad actors, and then you can shunt them off to a sandbox, and then have somebody, i.e. us or Highpoint, if they're managing it for you, come and take a look at that and see if it's really malicious or not. But you now have all these solutions that fit in at the various different spots over here. The cool thing about Fortinet, and when you talk about our FortiGate, right, there's multiple functionalities built into that box. And you might remember a term back in the day called UTM, Unified Threat Management. It was a term that was typically used for a lot of SMB-type businesses where you had a lot of functionality, DLP, for example, built into a single box, whereas in the enterprise you had individual products for that. So the gray, the functionality in gray, you get all that functionality in every FortiGate that we sell, no matter how big or how small it is. That includes app control, threat protection, authentication, your next-gen firewall, which is IPS, IDS, and the firewall functionality. All that in one box. And then, of course, you have, for example, there's your Deceptor there, your sandbox, your endpoint protection, web application firewall right there, and So you can say that we cover wire to wire of your data flow. Okay, Fortinet has the ability to protect that. Okay, now does that mean you can bring Fortinet in and solve all your problems in OT? Absolutely not. We're dependent on partners just like everybody else is. While we have visibility at the enterprise level, and we do a very good job at that, the fact of the matter is we're not hardcore OT people. We're not. Folks like Clarity and Nozomi are partners of ours. They do that deep packet inspection really at this level down here very well, but they also understand those practices and what normal behaviors are. So they do behavior anomaly detection. We're not in that business, they're in that business. So that detection, they feed into our firewall. We're more the prevention part. So they feed data into us that we then recognize and can address. And that's how we work with the likes of them. Okay. The purple, because it's all on the same, all that functionality, whether it's in the FortiGate or independently, is all in the same operating system. So they are all inherently integrated. When you add, we have a manager, an analyzer, a SIM, and a SOAR. Okay? When you add all of those pieces together, and you're running it either in whether it's a NOC or a SOC or whatever you have, that is the Fortinet fabric. And if you've heard that term, if you've heard people say, what is the Fortinet fabric, that's it. Now here's the really, really cool part of the fabric that kind of separates us from our main competition at least. In order to have that experience, you don't need to be exclusively on Fortinet. You saw the Aruba guys sitting out there. Forescout guys aren't here. But that NAC, we integrate with them as if they were our own NAC. So if you have a company that's invested in Aruba and ClearPass and they like that, but they want this experience, they don't have to get rid of ClearPass and buy our NAC to have that experience. They are a fabric-ready partner. And we have over 280 of those. So depending on your customer and your customer needs, Fortinet can drop in various different points and create a broad, integrated, and automated experience, whether you have all our stuff or whether you want to protect investments that you have already made and still have that kind of an experience. And that is a major advantage in looking at us for certain projects. We didn't just kind of bebop into the OT business because it became a big deal over the last few years. We've actually been working on this for over a decade, not only within our OS, but also within our products. We have ruggedized firewalls, switches, and access points. They are rated for minus 50 degrees Celsius to plus 50 degrees Celsius. They can take a serious beating. They're rail mounted. They run on AC power as well. They fit harsh environments in order to be able to operate where they need to operate. And going back to the FortiGate features I said before, so everything you see here is what you can expect to get in every Fortinet box or VM. Like I said, we don't do everything ourselves. Like everybody else, we have to have good partners too. These are just a sampling of some of our technology partners. So you'll see the visibility and threat intelligence folks over here. I mentioned a couple of them before, Nozomi and Clarity in particular. But we partner and are integrated with these folks. Operations and orchestration. We partner with these folks as well. And this is just an example of some of the other players that we play with. Forescout I previously mentioned. And then down here, basically solution vendors. So HighPoint, this is where you would find them, right? And those of you who are thinking, how come you didn't put their logo up here and you've got like somebody else's? Well, you can chalk that up to my screw up right there. So my apologies. I didn't know how else to say that because I literally just discovered it about 15 minutes ago. But the fact of the matter is, like I said, we have partners. We can't access people like you without knowing people like Highpoint, and we can't help you and bring these solutions to you without them. Just like they really can't without us and the other players in the room. Control vendors, Schneider Electric, by the way, my pal right here, Mike, comes to us from Schneider Electric. He comes from within industry. Me, I'm just a humble channel guy, but he's the brains of the operation here, and you'll see that in just a few moments. We have global integrators that we work with, and then we have other players that help bring this to market as well. This is just super quick. Every person you see here is dedicated to OT at Fortinet, okay? We are really known for being an internet security company, cyber security company, an OEM, a developer. You know, how are you guys in OT? Well, basically we have a division. Everybody you see here either comes from within industry or has worked within industry in one way or another, to include our marketing team, which, by the way, is by far and away the best marketing team in Fortinet. And I don't say that just because we're all on the same team, but the way that they integrate with customers is unlike how any of our other marketing teams integrate with customers. That's just part of it. There's one more. So on the channel team over here, there's 6 of us. We have literally 6 people dedicated into driving and developing partners, enabling them on all things Fortinet to bring us to market. We are very committed to the OT space by the team that you see on these 2 slides. That said, that's just a setup piece. Now the real interesting stuff is going to come now. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike. But thank you for being here. If you have any questions, please seek us out. We'll be hanging around after a while in the back, and we'd love to talk to you.
All right, thanks, Lou. Quite the setup, brains of the operation. Look out. Okay, so before I get into my piece, I just wanted to go through kind of 3 things in general to kind of start off here about a little bit about my background and kind of the problem I think we solve. I'll go through kind of my background and then kind of an analogy I've seen over my career, and then an example of how that just came to fruition probably like last week. So Lou's diagram he had up there before, I've spent most of my career on the OT side. I talk with people at Ottertail. I think there's some Ottertail people out here somewhere. Worked with those guys on their OT side of the business, on the software side. So I've spent better part of 20 years on the OT side of the business. So what I saw was over the years, you know, everybody in OT kind of wants to do their own thing. They're kind of an island. They, you know, security people are kind of, you know, viewed as being in the way. Over the years, as we kind of opened up more and more, there were more security people coming into these meetings, you know, and they were demanding architectures that worked, especially when you started pushing data outside of OT out to the cloud for analytics and things of that nature. So now that I've moved over into security, there's an analogy I've always found kind of funny, because I've seen this in rooms, you know, over the years, is that it's sort of like the IT folks and the operations folks. It's kind of like an 8th grade dance. You know, you go in and they're both on 2 sides of a room in a big room, and they kind of are looking at each other, and they're all in their own kind of little world. Each person has kind of ruined the other person's day at one point or another in their duration at the company. So our role really here in the vertical market for Fortinet is to just straighten that out, be kind of the middleman, resolve some of those issues and problems. So it's not really a cultural barrier within the business to secure the OT side of it. So an example of that was we had, just this last week, this is the type of person that I've dealt with over my career quite a bit. It was a guy at a large manufacturer, and what his problem was he saw us at a conference similar to this one probably back in June. His role at the organization was he was in charge of every OT capital project. So whether it's an OEM that was going to be put in place or a control retrofit of any kind, he had about 16 capital projects he was keeping track of. So he went and took at a conference like this, took some time and looked at our technology. And really his core problem was this. You know, we had a BDR contact them, and we set up a call and we talked through it. Really his core problem was this, that the security at one point had taken his PLCs offline when he didn't know what was happening. So he was doing his normal job, and he didn't even know how it had happened. But the PLCs had been taken offline. And really when it boiled down to it, he's like, I just want to know what's happening, what they're doing. So the next meeting that we have with them is we bring both of those people together and we walk through a product that can cover both the IT side that they're familiar with, and I'll talk a little bit more about how the fabric does that. It's a nice piece that can cover both sides. But really all he wants is the ability to understand what's happening on his side of the business and be able to contribute and say, he doesn't want to manage the switches are managed by IT. He doesn't want to manage the firewall, that's managed by IT as well. He just wants to have a say in the game and figure out what's happening. And that's really the core reason that all this team exists, is to solve that problem. So we'll go through just kind of the fabric strategies for OT here. So threat detection and protection, Lou alluded to some of this. And we're going to go in a little bit more detail about network segmentation and then micro segmentation specifically. So this has to do with going down and looking at the industrial protocols that we've put in place. We can go down and do deep packet inspection. So we have broad coverage. As Lou had mentioned, we have over 60 OT IT protocols. And then also the ability to look at ICS signatures for vulnerabilities, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So virtual patching. So there are a lot of things that are headless in this world, so meaning they don't have a front end. You can't really apply a patch to it, and there's no operating system that you can put an agent on. So you can actually draw just a border around it using a virtual patch with our equipment. So that's another piece that we have. So really you're looking to do a simplified user interface and have something that can be applied in both ICS and OT. So threat and vulnerability management, again, if you have the ability to go back and look inside the deep packet inspection, this is kind of the secret sauce around how we're able to do vol management. So all the ICS signatures that we have, it starts with understanding not just the visibility of the network topology itself, but also the payload as it moves through the organization. So you hear a lot about the first steps that you take are in OT is visibility. There's really two types of that. There's where's the traffic going and also what's contained inside that traffic. And we can do both of those with the product. Compliance, if you can see it, you can, in our case, you can control the traffic, but you can also be able to report off it. So we have a few different reporting packages. As you had mentioned, you may have a SIM yourself or another way to report it. We can pull that information out into compliance. And this, depending on your organization, for utilities like Ottertail, they're concerned about NERC-CIP. If you're trying to do something around NIST or 62443 or things of that nature, you always want to have the ability to go down and pull that reporting out. We have the ability to do those products ourselves, so we have a SIM solution. We have a product called FortiAnalyzers. You can pull that report information out and run it yourselves. But that's kind of the next leg in the stool there, is being able to pull it out and look at compliance. So digitalization, which is always a hard word for me to say. I say digitization and different words like that. But essentially, specialized solutions, being able to go back and do things like SOAR. So as you have a solution that expands out past IT and gets into OT, you want to be able to have partnerships and then have an open fabric that I'll talk about a little bit more, platform for third parties. So as you kind of move across these four, I'll go through kind of some of the first steps you would take and how you go about doing that within our technology. So I put these up all the time in terms of a maturity scale, and I'm not going to read off all the, it's a bit of an eye chart in terms of what's up there because there's a lot of different details there. Most of where people are right now is really somewhere in here or in level 2. So we're going to talk about in a little bit of detail is network segmentation and then micro segmentation. But the nice thing about Fortinet is that as you kind of become more active in your defense and go through the levels of presentation or protection on the y-axis there, we have products that kind of you can mature and grow up with. So we talk to a green field or white space, whatever a vendor wants to call it, somebody that's never worked with us before. They not only want to kind of get off on the right foot and figure out, okay, how do I get a basic inventory? Or how do I do you guys have the capability to do some type of an assessment or structure or things like that? That's kind of the getting off point. What they really want is they don't want, 6 different vendors for each one of these steps. So there may be things that we're very good at, best of breed in terms of some of our technology. Certainly our next generation firewall is that. But there may be other solutions as they kind of move up the chain that they may not want to bring in other people to pull those applications off. I don't know in terms of a show of hands, when you look at this chart where you guys think you are, how many people think they're level 1 in the room right now? No hands? How about level 5? We'll go all the way up to the top. Nobody? Level 2? Yeah, there are a couple hands like that. So I think that's where the market really is right now, is probably right about here. For those of you that are kind of just getting started, I'll talk about that here in a little bit as well. So in terms of a security framework, you can pick a number of different things that are out there. I mentioned 62443. This happens to be NIST. So the framework around NIST: identify, protect, detect, response, and recover. And you see over here, we talk about the foundation and the maturity of a SOC. The first foundation piece of it is just network security. So if you can't secure the network, obviously you're in big trouble. As you work through, and you can do sandboxing, and Lou mentioned deception technology, this has to do as you advance up this chain. It depends on what you're doing. But as you mature as an organization, your security posture matures. You can stick with us as a vendor and have all those things provided. And this again talks about the NIST in terms of its 5 steps. And if you have a solution and you're trying to address all these different aspects of NIST, this broad, integrated, and automated portion of the slide over here on the left, I think there's an animation in here that we circle around it. So this has to do with the nomenclature around what we have in our security fabric. So you want to be able to touch all the different devices and all the different processes, and it has to be able to integrate and touch not only our systems and do a good job there, but also other systems as well, and play nicely with those technologies. And then automated, this is kind of a argued word in OT. You don't necessarily want to make automatic decisions on firewall rules and things of that nature as you work through it. We would use the word automatable. So, there's really 4 things you can do in security. You can, either block or allow or visualize or quarantine. It just depends on what you're trying to do. You may not want to block automatically. If you bring that up with OT people, they kind of look at you funny. But you can certainly send an alert out automatically and automate some of those processes as well. And then once you start churning through a large amount of data, we have AI that's in the system as well. So there's a couple of slides here. We just kind of talk at a high level, and I'll skip through this one and go to this one. This is just a different version of what Lou was talking about in terms of the security fabric. So we have these pillars that will break out into another slide here in a little bit. But the common idea is that, again, you see broad, integrated, and automated on the left-hand side. The idea is that you can pull all these systems together and have a common platform. So no matter what you plug in, no matter the level of system that you have in place there, the login in terms of what you're doing around security is always going to be the same, and it speaks to each other very well. And it's an open ecosystem you see over here on the right-hand side, so it's open to some of those partners that we talked about as well in the past. As we break it down further here, you see these pillars again and an open ecosystem there over there on the right-hand side. In terms of security operations, being able to protect, detect, and respond over here on the right, all the way on the right-hand side. And this piece, there's really more than any other, especially in IT, a trend that I continually see that's out there is a lot of people want to have an on-premises solution for OT technology. So we cover kind of the triangle. You can have an appliance on site, you can have a private cloud or a public cloud, all of them, and they can all use the same operating system. So regardless of where you put the system in place. Lou had mentioned the EDR application. One of the things about the EDR application is it can be deployed on-premise. So you're not beholden to the cloud as it pulls into place, and that's a real problem for a lot of people in OT. So as you move across here, when you talk about different applications in IoT, being able to have that visibility, and we'll show a couple of slides here that show what that looks like inside the product. But eventually, if you can see it, you can start to steer the traffic around within the FortiGate itself, and then you can log and then eventually move it out to other advanced technologies. So there's a lot of different products on here. Obviously, our nomenclature is Forti everything, so that's up here on the slide. Everything in a box has an OT, application in OT or engineering specifically around OT in the environment, whether we've hardened the technology or it's specifically been developed with on-premises or other OT-specific things in mind. So getting along the lines of kind of where you start, if you're just getting started in the environment, you're not sure what to do is securing your OT application. This just has to do with what we do with a CTAP. So we can pull a report together that kind of gives you a high-level view of the number of assets that you have in place, a little bit about topology. And this has nothing to do with installing an actual FortiGate to do control. This is just looking to see what's there. I worked for a visibility vendor in the past in OT, and this is one of the things that they'll do as well. They'll provide some detail around it. So depending on what you want to do for a for a first assessment, there's a lot of different things you can do. You can hire a consultant, or you can bring a vendor in like us or somebody else that pulls in all this information.
Hey, Mike, real quick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So you use the term CTAP, for those of you that are not familiar with that, cyber threat assessment, and it's where we can come in and we'll kind of span a box and we'll kind of look at traffic. We don't mess with anything, but we can produce a report, okay, that will give you a bunch of information as to what he's talking about. CTAP is Cyber Threat Assessment Program.
Thanks, Lou. No, good point. So what's up here now is really the language of OT. So I've put a slide like this up for a long time in my life, and usually I get a couple of questions on it. One is, if you don't see the protocol that you have up there, can you guys develop it? We develop these things all the time. We have active staff that's doing it all the time. But these are all the different things that are down in the weeds, talking to each other inside of the OT network, down at the low levels. In terms of protocol specificity, so you see here there's a FortiGate here stacked next to a PLC. So you can actually go all the way down inside the application detail and find out what the registers are inside of. I think we pick on Modbus here because it's been out there since the 70s. But this just goes down to the level that's there. We're down all the way now going from north-south traffic to actually what's down inside the PLCs and what's talking to each other at this layer. So we'll talk about how that works in terms of microsegmentation in a little bit. Topology and visibility. So what this is you see this says physical topology up here. What we're showing here is a FortiGate as it's seen here. This is SD-WAN as it's shown out, connected to a couple of different systems out to the internet. And then you have a smaller FortiGate here, and then switches that are installed. What these circles represent, and this is a homogeneous environment within FortiGate. So these are our products from the top all the way down. We have a technology called FortiLink that is able to provide all this visibility. So what this means is if you explode these out, you'll see some details about the endpoint devices here within the product. Now, Lou mentioned some of our partners in the space that do visibility. If you have an environment with a lot of different switches or firewalls or things like that, we'll have some visibility into it. We wouldn't give you all the different endpoints here at the bottom, so we do have people that we partner with are able to give that endpoint visibility all the way out to the end device. Another example here, this is the Purdue Model as it's blown up. So this is what we call an asset identity center. So you have a firewall located here, and then as you move up, this will automatically layer within. You see the OT view here in the asset list. So you'll have these layer in within your product. Again, the mapping of this is just an idea of where the traffic is flowing, not necessarily what's on it. That was in the previous slide. You'll see some of these visibility vendors when they show up and do this, they'll have different layers of mapping and things of that nature. But this is in the latest version of the OS that's part of the fabric within Fortinet. So we'll go into one kind of use case here, and there's a couple other slides like this, and then we'll wrap and finish with questions. But this is, we also have a NAC product. Oops, move forward a little bit quickly there. We have a NAC product. And so what Fortinet is doing is just device discovery. So there's 20 different profiling methods that we can discover In this case, we're using OUI to be able to discover the devices that are out there. So we support a number of different methods there, and it can be not only our stuff, but other people's technology as well. So once you've discovered the industrial endpoint, you can do a few different things with it. So you can segment it off virtually. As long as you have a managed switch, the NAC product's going to be able to pick it up. But you can actually segment it off because you know the traffic that's moving that I showed on the previous slide down to, say, a Modbus layer. You can automatically put this in the correct VLAN that you want. So instead of having an idea of where this is, you're now segmenting off, understanding what it is with NAC, and then segmenting it off with our products so that you understand that it's going to be in a specific VLAN. The case we're showing here is when you put on, say you pull something off the shelf and you put a new device on, how do you know what to do with that? And the NAC will isolate that automatically. So this just has to do with putting an unknown PLC there. And then also if you're going to access this, a real common issue is you have a third party that's accessing your plant floor. How do you control that, and how do you direct and steer that traffic? So you can actually give them access based on not just one VLAN, but specifically you can only talk to, say, a Siemens PLC that's talking Modbus on this specific VLAN. You can get down to that layer, kind of a belt and suspenders approach to it. So that's about as nerdy as the presentation gets. So there's not much else out there that's worse. So a couple of simple diagrams that are out here just talks about some normal processes up here in red. So kind of some standard problems. First one's pretty straightforward. It's just basic segmentation that we put in place with a FortiGate there that can be physical or virtual. And there's no communication between these two devices if there's already a segment that already exists. You can put a VDOM that's up in place within the product itself so that you can put all that in from a software perspective here in a FortiGate. You may not be able to physically isolate these and put, depending on your environment. One thing that's really common in OT is they don't all look the same. They look very different. Number of different customers, even if they're making the same product, have very different environments. Depends on where they go. They could be older environments with a number of PLCs. They could have RTUs and SCADA. You go to the next place and it's totally different. It may be built 10 years later. A lot of manufacturers just sort of bought a bunch of OEMs. Whatever was on sale 10 years ago, that's what they bought. So you have a real ubiquitous, or diverse rather, not ubiquitous, variety of technology that's deployed there. And you may not be able to be able to segment off what you'd like to do logically, so you can do it virtually within the product. Another common one is remote access. Operator needs to remotely access as an HMI. There's a lot of different ways to do this. We just talk about the NAC way to do this here. So you have a remote operator that's logged in, via VPN. NAC is going to be able to control what that guy sees and be able to quarantine off anything that he sees from that's a different switch, even off of a different switch, or not necessarily our own technology. And then you have the different VLANs that are set up here. Remote access has become a huge thing with the pandemic, being able to set this up remotely. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You don't need NAC necessarily to do it. We have other products that we're continuing to develop that help with this problem. But this is a real big one in terms of being able to remote in. They don't necessarily know third parties and also staff as well. How are you able to maintain that over time? And I think that's, this just has a new device that's been added in. This is the last one. So as a new device gets dropped into the network, we logically segregate it off to a specific network, even if it's physically connected to the same OT network. So you don't necessarily have to have it VLANed off initially. Will automatically recognize what that is and then quarantine it off. Again, one of those four main functions you have in cybersecurity. So I'm going to wrap it there, and I'll take any questions from anybody while I get a drink of water over here. Anyone? Bueller? Anyone? Anything online? Sure.
What about like east-west protection and detection? Where do you guys really fit in that space? So PLC talking to PLC, or all within the same kind of layer?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. We do that as well. So I focus kind of mainly on just, the up and down, because that's the majority of, what people kind of start out with. But east-west is definitely something we do. We talk all those protocols between, like the industrial protocols that we have, all the ones that are there, we attach to that as well. So if you have not necessarily between the layers, but as you go from side to side, we understand what that traffic is and can segment off that as well. So it just depends on, if you have a machine that's you only want it to go within the network, say you have, if it's Modbus or it's something else that goes across and is supposed to communicate with another device, you can whitelist that off and say it only can talk to this type of device within the east-west traffic. That's a good point. I think I talked about east-west, but I never talked about, maybe I just talked about north-south, I'm not sure. But yeah, that's definitely a good point, something that we do. Sure.
Do you have any good input or tips for security guys who have to work with industrial controls operators?
Bring donuts? That's a good one.
How do we bridge that gap? 'Cause we're all,
Sure.
trying to manage a bunch of different, we have different goals, but we all have the same goal at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and probably the question within everybody's business, and you have to kind of give a political answer. It depends on the staff and the history within the company. I've talked to people that have said, and I give him credit, I talked to a guy that worked at a pharmaceutical manufacturer, and he said previously in his background he had run an Nmap scan on a substation and shut it down. Okay, so when that happens, like, are you ever going to get that guy, is his name ever going to be not mud within OT? It's tough, right? But I think, that's really why we have a department here at Fortinet that does this, because as a vendor comes in, you can kind of, use them as a buffer and say, all right, this is how it's going to address both sides of it. But it is cultural in terms of what's applied there. But I would just say, go in there with an open mind and be cognizant that they're trying to keep everything up and you're trying to service them as well. It's not a great answer, but that's...
Well, and to add to that, if I may. Sure. And just for the benefit of the folks online, and the question was, if the IT folks are having trouble connecting with the OT folks, how can you bridge that gap? And one of the things that Fortinet, that we, and specifically our channel team, that we are, as of very recently, as recently as like April, that we are pioneering in sort of channel partnership. It's never really been done before. Traditionally, folks like Highpoint and us, and OEM and Highpoint, we go to market together for you, okay? And then distribution is sort of a fulfillment player for the actual, right? It's a logistics thing. Cybersecurity and OT is so new, and there is so little expertise. It's little expertise on the IT side. There are folks that are out there and have been out there for a long time doing cybersecurity and OT. They are what I call deep, let's just call it hardcore OT players. Now, in a lot of cases, we are kind of new to them, we meaning the manufacturers, okay? These are guys who don't sell product and don't care to. They are pure consultants. They can be integrators. They are pre-sales and post-sales consultants. And so what we've done, and at the RSA conference, we got a whole bunch of people together, some larger players, and we got them all in a room at a dinner, and we had literally, for 3 hours, one conversation with 26 people. One. I've never seen anything like it before. But it was basically around this concept, and we've just simply started calling it the ecosystem, and it's where we partner with someone like Highpoint, who has the relationship with you guys, right, and none of that changes, but we bring in another partner who is not interested, but has this expertise, and they have a ton of expertise in driving these conversations within customers and bringing these people together. We actually have a guide that we can do this with. But it does involve bringing in another partner, but I will tell you, it is paying a lot of dividends, and we have a lot of customers getting real value add out of it. Is it an additional and extra cost? It is, no question. But are we cracking down walls that have previously existed? Yes, we are. And that is part of the reason why this business is growing as quickly as it is. Because the fact is the market is here, right? All the stuff that I showed you before, I mean, it's happening. And I'll tell you another thing that's really driving it is insurance. Insurance companies are no longer insuring unless steps are being taken in this regard. And so that is very quickly driving people together. And you're right, it is a very political answer, but there are opportunities and resources and partnerships there to help. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of it is kind of new. We think we're pioneering this. So that's that answer in a long version, sorry.
That's it. We'll be out in the booth for anybody that wants to talk to us or walk up to us with questions afterwards if you have anything you want to discuss with us. So thanks for having us.